At 61, Silas Grant owned more Wyoming land than a king, but every night he ate canned beans alone in a mansion that echoed with ghosts. The house overlooked the Powder River, 12 empty rooms of polished oak and cold stone. When he posted an ad for a housekeeper, he figured he'd get some quiet woman from town, someone who'd cook and clean and leave him to his silence. He was wrong. Instead, a woman named Jo McClary rode up on a paint mare that looked as tired as she did. The horse's coat was a patchwork of dust and old miles. The woman's face was hidden under the brim of a cracked hat, but she sat in that broken saddle like she was born to it. She had a bedroll, a small pack, and a stubborn pride that was about the only thing she hadn't lost. She asked for barn space and wages. But what she brought to that lonely ranch was something money could never buy. And what she was truly looking for was something Silas never knew he had. The sun was just breaking over the Bighorn Mountains, spilling light across the 20,000-acre Grant Ranch. Silas stood at his kitchen window, a mug of black coffee in his hand, watching the shadows retreat. The lines around his eyes were maps of a hard life, squinting into prairie winds, sizing up cattle, measuring the worth of a man with a single glance. Behind him, the mansion was a museum of a life that was over. His wife, Eleanor, had designed it 25 years ago. She'd pictured laughter in the halls and muddy boots on the Persian rugs. Now the rugs were pristine. The dining table was set for one, and the only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. He'd fired the last housekeeper 3 months ago. A nervous woman who treated him like an old man, and worse, moved Eleanor's things. Since then, he'd lived on canned food and stale coffee. The newspaper ad he'd placed lay on the counter, crumpled and ignored for 3 weeks. Housekeeper wanted, room and board plus wages. He'd figured the Grant name still meant something in Powderhorn County, that his reputation for paying fair would bring someone running. But nobody came. Then he heard it. The slow, tired crunch of hoofbeats on the gravel drive. He watched from the window as the rider approached, a paint horse limping just slightly, and on its back, a woman. She was all worn denim and faded flannel, a story of hard travel written in the dust on her boots. She dismounted with an easy grace that defied her obvious exhaustion, her movements sure and confident. The mare stood without being tied, head drooping, trusting its rider completely. Silas opened the door before she could knock. He studied her the way he'd study a bull he was thinking of buying. She was maybe in her mid-50s, her face weathered by the sun, her auburn hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a simple braid. Her eyes, a steady brown, met his without a flicker of fear or intimidation. There was a quiet dignity about her, a pride that had been bent, but not broken. "Mr. Grant," she said. Her voice was raspy, like she hadn't used it in a while. "I'm Jo McClary. I saw your ad." "That ad's 3 weeks old," Silas said, his voice flat. "I've been traveling," she answered simply, wiping her dusty boots on the mat. "Took me a while to work up the courage to come calling." Inside, surrounded by Eleanor's expensive furniture, Jo McClary looked even more out of place. But she didn't shrink. Her eyes scanned the polished wood, the family photos on the side table, Silas and Eleanor, 2 smiling children, and he saw no envy in her gaze, only a deep, quiet weariness. "Coffee?" he offered. "That'd be kind." As he poured, he watched her in the reflection of the window. She stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind her back. No fidgeting, no nervous chatter. She took the mug he offered and wrapped both hands around it, soaking in the warmth. "You have references?" he asked. She pulled a folded, worn envelope from her shirt pocket. It held 3 letters, ranch work. One from the Hartwell place up in Montana. Silas recognized the name. Good people. Says here you worked for the Hartwells 2 seasons, he said, scanning the letter. Yes, sir. Until Mrs. Hartwell's arthritis got too bad and they had to sell the big place. She sipped her coffee, her eyes never leaving his face. I can cook plain. I keep a house clean without a fuss. I'm particular, but not picky. Room and board, Silas said, testing her. You understand that means the bunkhouse. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she shook her head. I was hoping for barn space, if that's all right. For me and my horse. Daisy's been with me 15 years. She doesn't do well when we're apart. Silas glanced out the window at the paint mare. The horse stood exactly where Joe had left her, patient and still. A bond like that wasn't common. That horse looks like she's been traveling hard. We both have, Joe said. A lifetime of exhaustion was packed into those 3 words. I can work for just room and board if wages are a problem. Daisy doesn't eat much, neither do I. There was no pity in her voice, just a statement of fact. He'd hired dozens of hands over the years. Most tried to sell themselves too hard or acted like they were doing him a favor. This woman was different. Standard wages, he said finally. 200 a week. Barn's got a clean stall and good hay. There's a tack room with a cot, if you don't mind the smell of leather. Relief flashed across her face, so quick he almost missed it. That would suit me fine, Mr. Grant. When do you want me to start? How about now? Silas nodded toward the living room, where a thin layer of dust covered every surface Eleanor had once kept gleaming. But get your horse settled first. She looks like she needs it more than I need my floors swept. Joe finished her coffee in one gulp and set the mug in the sink. Thank you, Mr. Grant. I'll take good care of your home. As she turned to leave, he noticed it. A slight hitch in her step, almost invisible. An old injury. And on her belt, a small, tarnished silver buckle. The engraving was worn, but he could just make it out. Champion Barrel Racing, 1987. It's just Joe, she said, as if reading his mind. And thank you again for the chance. He watched from the window as she led Daisy to the barn, speaking to the horse in a low, soothing voice. The mare followed without a lead rope, her ears pricked forward. There was a story there, in the way they moved together, a partnership forged in hardship. Silas poured himself another coffee and looked around the empty kitchen. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel quite so crushing. He'd hired a housekeeper, but something told him he'd gotten a whole lot more. The next morning, Joe entered the mansion just as the sun was rising. She found Silas in the kitchen, a can of beans in one hand, a can opener in the other. He looked up, a little embarrassed. I was just making breakfast, he said. Joe glanced at the counter. A row of cans. Beans, soup, more beans. When's the last time you had a meal that didn't come out of a can, Mr. Grant? He actually had to think about it. Been a while, he admitted. She opened the refrigerator. It was nearly empty. The pantry wasn't much better. I'll make a grocery list, she said. For now, let's see what we can do. She found flour, sugar, and some eggs that were still good. Soon, the kitchen filled with the smell of pancakes and fresh coffee. It was a beautiful kitchen, designed by someone who loved to cook. But it felt abandoned, like a stage waiting for actors who never came home. Your wife was a good cook, she asked, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. The best, Silas said, sitting at the table watching her. Used to say I married her for her biscuits. Did you? No, I married her because she was the only woman I ever met who could outstubborn me. A flicker of old pain crossed his face, but the biscuits didn't hurt. He took a bite of the pancake she set in front of him and closed his eyes. Been too long, he murmured. After breakfast, Joe started on the house. She moved through the rooms like a quiet storm, dusting, cleaning, opening windows that had been sealed shut for years. She brought order without erasing the memory of the woman who had created this home. It was on the living room mantelpiece that she found it. A silver-framed photograph, turned face down behind a vase. She picked it up. A younger Silas, his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes. In front of them, a teenage boy and a young girl, all of them caught in a moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. "You can put that back where you found it." Joe turned. Silas was standing in the doorway, his face a mask. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was just dusting. It was face down." "That's where it belongs," he said, his voice raw. Joe looked from the smiling faces in the photo to the broken man in the doorway. "They're beautiful," she said quietly. His jaw tightened. "Eleanor died 6 years ago. Cancer. The kids, they have their own lives now. Don't need reminders of their old man." Joe carefully placed the photograph back on the mantel, but she didn't turn it face down. She angled it just slightly, so the morning light caught the glass, making the captured moment seem to breathe. "Mr. Grant," she said softly, "losing people doesn't mean you have to lose their memory, too." "Easy words," he shot back, his voice bitter. "You ever been married? Had kids?" "Once, a long time ago," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "It didn't work out. He saw it then. The same old grief he carried, just a different shape. The kind that settles in your bones and never quite leaves." "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. They worked in silence after that. By midday, the mansion felt different. Brighter. The air itself felt lighter. She found him in his office, buried in account books, a man trying to outrun his own ghosts with numbers. "Lunch," she offered. They ate sandwiches on the back porch, looking out over the rolling pastures. The silence between them was comfortable now. "Why did your kids stop coming home?" she asked. He was quiet for a long time. After Eleanor died, he finally said, "I wasn't fit company. I threw myself into the work, buying more land, building the herd. I figured if I was successful enough, they'd want to be a part of it." He chewed his sandwich thoughtfully. "Turns out money is a poor substitute for a father." "They know you miss them," Joe said. "Don't know if that matters anymore. They send Christmas cards." Joe thought of her own mistakes, her own regrets, the roads not taken. "People can surprise you," she said. "Sometimes when you think it's too late, it isn't. You speak from experience." "Some," she said, gathering their plates. "But mostly I speak from hope." That afternoon, she cleaned the upstairs bedrooms. The kids' rooms were like time capsules. Sarah's room was filled with horse posters and riding ribbons. Thomas's had model airplanes and baseball trophies. Eleanor's presence was strongest in the master bedroom. Her jewelry box still sat on the dresser. Her books were still stacked on the nightstand. But the bed was perfectly made, untouched. Silas, she realized, slept in the guest room down the hall. He'd turned his own bedroom into a shrine. When she came back downstairs, she found him standing in the living room, staring at the family photograph she had turned towards the light. "I used to be a better man," he said, his voice thick. "What makes you think you aren't now? Better men don't drive their children away." Joe stood beside him. "Better men don't give up on themselves either." He turned and really looked at her then, seeing past the worn clothes and the tired eyes. He saw a woman who had known loss and hadn't let it break her. "Why are you really here, Joe McClary?" he asked. "A woman like you could find work anywhere. Why answer an ad from a bitter old rancher in the middle of nowhere?" She held his gaze. "Maybe because bitter old ranchers in the middle of nowhere need somebody to answer their ads." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough for now. The real truth was something she wasn't ready to say. And it was a truth that would change everything. 3 days later, Joe found the spoon. It was in the back of a kitchen drawer, wrapped in a faded dish towel as if it were a secret. It was carved from cherry wood, worn smooth from years of use, with delicate leaves etched into the handle. This was not a store-bought thing. This was made with love. "Where did you find that?" Silas was in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the spoon. "Back of the drawer," she said carefully. "It's beautiful." He came closer, reaching for it, then stopping. "Eleanor made that, our first Christmas. We didn't have any money. She carved it from a piece of wood her father had saved." His voice was soft with memory. "She used to say that food made with your own hands tasted better because it carried a piece of your heart." "Why was it hidden away?" Joe asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "After she died, I couldn't stand to see it. It reminded me too much of Sunday mornings, her humming while she stirred the pancake batter." He finally took the spoon, his thumb tracing the carved leaves. "I wrapped it up. Figured I'd throw it out one day, but I never could." Joe held out her hand. "May I?" He gave it to her. The wood felt warm, alive. "It's meant to be used," she said gently. "Hiding it doesn't honor her. It just makes the memory hurt." She walked to the stove where soup was simmering and stirred it with Eleanor's spoon. The motion was natural, respectful. Silas watched, his face a storm of pain and memory, and something else, something that looked like relief. For the first time in 6 years, the kitchen didn't feel like a museum. It felt like a kitchen. "She would have liked you," he said suddenly. That evening, he didn't retreat to his office after dinner. He stayed at the kitchen table, watching her. "Tell me about the buckle," he said. "The rodeo one." "That was a different lifetime," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I was good for a while. Had the horses, had the nerve." "What happened?" She hesitated, deciding how much of the truth to offer. "Horse went down rounding a barrel. Broke my collarbone and 3 ribs. Healed up, went right back. Fell again. After the 3rd time, my husband said I had to choose, him or the rodeo." A sad smile touched her lips. "I chose what I was good at over what I was supposed to want. Turned out I was wrong about both." "You regret it?" "Every day for 10 years. Then I realized regret was just another way of staying stuck in the past." She stood to clear the table. "Now I just try to be grateful for what I've got." "Which is?" "Daisy," she said. "And enough sense to recognize a good situation when I find one." But Joe was carrying more than just regret. She was carrying a mountain of debt. A week later, she was organizing Silas's chaotic office when she found them. A stack of veterinary bills, held together with a rubber band, tucked behind an old ledger. The patient's name on every one was Daisy McClary. The bills told the story of her long journey to his ranch. Emergency colic treatment in Utah. X-rays for lameness in Montana. Expensive medications in Colorado. Each bill was another stop on a desperate pilgrimage, another debt she couldn't pay. "Finding everything you need." Joe spun around, clutching the papers. Silas stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I was just dusting," she stammered. "Dr. Patterson called me the day after you arrived," he said, his voice quiet, closing the door behind him. "The vet in Sheridan. He wanted me to know about Daisy's condition before I agreed to let you stay." Joe's stomach plummeted. "Her condition?" "Early arthritis, an old injury that never healed right. He said you'd been managing it, but the constant travel was killing her." The numbers on the bills blurred as tears she'd held back for months finally fell. "I know she needs to be settled," she whispered. "I know I should probably find her a better home." The thought of parting with Daisy was like tearing out a piece of her own soul. Silas came around the desk and took the bills from her shaking hands. He scanned them, his expression growing grim. "Joe, this is over $3,000. I've been paying it off," she said, wiping her eyes. $10 here, 20 there. I never miss a payment." He looked at her, at this woman who had driven herself into poverty for a sick horse. He thought of his own wealth, how easily he wrote checks for thousands without a second thought. When was the last time he'd sacrificed for anything? Then he did something she never expected. He opened his desk drawer, pulled out his checkbook, and began to write. "Mr. Grant, no, I can't let you. This isn't charity," he said, his voice firm as he tore out the check and handed it to her. "It's an investment. It's hard to do good work when you're worried sick. Consider it a signing bonus." She stared at the check. It was enough to clear every debt. It was freedom. It was a lifeline. But it felt like something else, too. A chain. "I'll pay you back," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know you will," he said. "When you can. No interest, no timeline, just between us." That night she sat in Daisy's stall, brushing the mare's coat until it shone. The weight of the debt was gone, but a new weight had taken its place, the weight of his kindness, his trust. It was a heavier burden than the money had ever been. She looked around the barn, at the clean hay, the full water trough. For the first time in a long, long time, she felt safe, secure. But she also felt trapped. She'd come here looking for a job, a temporary refuge. But she was finding something more complicated, and she still hadn't found what she was really looking for, because her secret was still buried, and it was a secret tied to the very land she was standing on. The marriage certificate was in the bottom of a filing cabinet, tucked between old tax returns. Eleanor Catherine Walsh and Silas James Grant, June 15th, 1985. The paper was yellowed, the edges worn, as if it had been held and folded and unfolded 1,000 times. That doesn't belong in there. Silas was in the doorway again, his face a familiar mask of pain. He took the certificate from her, his fingers tracing Eleanor's name. "She always said I treated our marriage like a business deal." Maybe she was right. "What makes you say that?" Joe asked gently. "I was always working, building this place. I thought that's what a husband did, provided." He sank into his desk chair, the weight of his regret visible in his slumped shoulders. "Turns out that's not the same thing as being present." "She knew you loved her." "I hope so. But love and attention aren't the same thing, are they?" Joe watched him, this man so lost in his own past. "Tell me about your wedding day," she said. He looked surprised, but then he started to talk. A small ceremony, a reception in her parents' backyard, his one good suit, her grandmother's dress. A small smile touched his lips. "I was nervous I was marrying someone too good for me." "But she chose you." "She did. Said she'd rather build something with a man who worked hard than inherit something from a man who didn't." He then showed her a small wooden box Eleanor had made. Inside were his treasures, her wedding ring, which he hadn't worn since she died, a pressed flower, and a folded letter. "She wrote it in the hospital," he said, his voice thick. "I found it on my pillow after the funeral. Have you read it recently?" "Not in years. Too hard." "Sometimes," Joe said, "the things that hurt the most are the things we most need to hear." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, his voice shaking, he began to read. "My dearest Silas," the letter began, "you are not perfect, but you are good. You built us a life that was rich in all the ways that matter, and I have never, for one moment, regretted choosing you. I know you will blame yourself. Please don't. Take care of Thomas and Sarah, but don't try to buy their love. They just need to feel yours. And please, my love, take care of yourself. Find someone to share meals with, someone to laugh with, Someone who reminds you that life is for living, not just for working. I will love you forever." When he finished, tears were tracking through the dust on his cheeks, but for the first time, Joe saw relief in his eyes. "She knew you," Joe said softly, "better than I knew myself. And she loved you anyway." He looked up at her then, really seeing her, not the housekeeper, not the charity case, a woman who had listened to his pain without judgment, a woman who had shown up just when he needed her most. "Joe," he said, his voice raw with emotion, "I'm glad you're here." "I'm glad I'm here too," she said. That night they ate dinner on the back porch, wrapped in blankets against the October chill. The conversation flowed easily now, as if the letter had unlocked something in him. He asked about her marriage. "It was complicated," she said. "We wanted different things. He wanted a wife at home, kids, a normal life. I wanted the rodeo, the road, the competition. I thought if I could just win enough, be good enough, everything else would fall into place." "Do you regret choosing the rodeo?" "I regret hurting him," she said, "but I don't regret trying to be the best at something I loved." They sat in silence for a while, two people who had made hard choices and lived with the fallout. "Eleanor was right," Joe said finally. "You do need someone to share meals with." Silas looked at her, his eyes serious in the flickering light of the heater. "Is that an application for the position?" Joe's heart skipped a beat. "Maybe, if you're hiring." "Benefits are good," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Room, board, and all the home cooking you can stand." "Sounds like a fair deal." Later, lying on her cot in the tack room, Joe's mind wasn't on sleep. It was on the man in the mansion and the space that was shrinking between them. Hope, a feeling she'd thought was long dead, was starting to stir. But her secret was still there, a ticking clock under the floorboards. And it was a secret that could destroy this fragile new beginning before it even had a chance to grow. She found the rodeo program in an old photo album. The paper was brittle, the colors faded, but the image on the cover was electrifying. A younger Joe McClary, 24 years old and fearless, astride a magnificent bay mare, rounding a barrel at impossible speed. The headline read, "Western States Championship, 1987. Joe McClary claims third consecutive title." "That you?" Silas was standing over her shoulder, his voice filled with awe. "A long time ago," she said, trying to close the album. "Wait." He took the program from her, studying the photo. "That's incredible form. You're barely touching the reins. That's pure trust." "The horse was Cherry," she said, her voice soft. "One in a million. We moved like we shared the same mind." He flipped through the program, his eyes widening. Arena records, sponsorships, an article near the back calling her Lightning Joe for her blistering speed. "You were famous," he said. "In a very small world," she replied, a bitter edge to her voice. "But that person doesn't exist anymore. The riding ended when Cherry died. I tried to keep going, but the nerve was gone. I started falling. The last one was bad. Broke my shoulder in 2 places. By the time I healed, my career was over. I was 31. What did you do?" "Fell apart," she said bluntly. "Drank too much. My husband left. I lost everything." She stood and went to the window, watching Daisy graze. "That woman in the picture, she was fearless. This woman, she's afraid of her own shadow." "This woman," Silas said, coming to stand beside her, "traveled across 3 states with a sick horse, never missing a payment on her vet bills. This woman rode up to a stranger's door and carved out a new life for herself. That sounds pretty fearless to me." His words hung in the air between them. He was closer now, so close she could feel the warmth from his body. "That's different," she whispered. "How?" "Because now," she said, her voice breaking. "The worst thing that could happen is losing this. Losing whatever is happening between us." "Joe," he said, his voice low and intense, "you're not going to lose this." He reached up and gently touched her cheek. "Lightning, Joe," he said softly. "Don't call me that." "Why not? It's who you are. It's who I was." "Same thing," he said, and then he kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, hesitant at first, but it deepened into something else. A recognition. Two lonely souls finding a port in a storm. When they broke apart, the world felt different. Sharper, more real. "I know this complicates things," she whispered. "Everything's already complicated," he said, a real smile transforming his weathered face. "A little more complication won't hurt." That night they cooked dinner together. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, felt charged with a new energy. He asked her about her best ride ever. "Cheyenne, 1986, she said, her eyes distant with memory. "A night event. The main lights went out. We ran the pattern in near darkness, just Cherry and me. We couldn't see. We just had to trust each other completely. We ran a 16:89, a record. But it wasn't about the time. It was about that feeling. For 17 seconds, we were perfect. We were exactly what we were meant to be." "That's how I feel about this land," Silas said. "Like it's a part of me. And now I'm starting to think I was meant to share it with someone." The words were a promise, a beginning. Lying in her cot that night, Jo allowed herself to believe. Maybe Silas was right. Maybe Lightning Joe wasn't dead, just sleeping. But she knew, with a cold dread in the pit of her stomach, that her biggest secret was still waiting. And when he found it out, it wouldn't matter if she was Lightning Joe or just Joe. All that would matter was the truth. And the truth was a loaded gun pointed right at the heart of everything they were building. She found the deed in the basement. She'd been looking for Christmas decorations when she stumbled on a box labeled E's Papers. Inside, in a manila envelope from the Powder-Horn County Recorder's office, was a land deed dated 1983. She unfolded it. The legal language was dense, but the names jumped out at her, seizing the air from her lungs. McClary Ranch, 640 acres. Owners, Joseph Franklin McClary and Mary Catherine McClary, her grandparents. Her hands started to shake. She read it again, her mind refusing to process the words. The land described in the deed, the eastern section of what was now the Grant Ranch, was the very land her family had lost in the drought of '83. The pasture where she'd learned to ride, where Daisy now grazed, was her birthright, her grandfather's ranch. Then she saw the signature on the transfer of ownership, a young, confident script. S.J. Grant, Silas. He had bought her family's land. The world tilted. She sank onto a dusty trunk, the paper crumpled in her fist. She remembered her mother's tears, her father's grim silence. They had lost everything. And Silas Grant had been the one to pick up the pieces for pennies on the dollar. "Joe, you find those decorations?" His voice echoed down the stairs. She quickly folded the deed, her heart hammering against her ribs, and shoved it in her pocket. "Still looking?" she called back, her voice miraculously steady. The rest of the day was a blur. She moved in a fog of betrayal and rage. He had known. He must have known. Her name was McClary. He had to have made the connection. Was this all some kind of guilt trip? Had he hired her out of pity? That night she cooked his favorite meal, pot roast, her hands moving on autopilot. The deed in her pocket felt like it was on fire. "You're quiet tonight," he said over dinner. "Just tired." After the meal, when the silence was stretching thin, she laid the deed on the table between them. "I found this today," she said, her voice cold. He picked it up. She watched his face as he read. watched the color drain from it when he saw the names. "Joe," he started. "My grandfather's land," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "The land you built this empire on. Did you know, all this time, did you know who I was?" "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I swear to you, Joe, I had no idea." "But you knew you bought it from a desperate widow. The sale price is right there. You paid a fraction of what it was worth." "Your grandmother came to me," he said, his voice hardening. "She was facing foreclosure. The bank was going to take everything. I gave her a way out. I paid off the mortgage, the back taxes, and gave her enough to buy a house in town. If I hadn't, she would have walked away with nothing." "You preyed on her." Joe stood, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "Do you have any idea what this feels like? To find out the man I care about, built his fortune on the ruins of my family." The words hung in the air between them, raw and ugly. "Joe, please," he said, his face etched with pain. "Don't let something that happened 40 years ago destroy what we have now." "What do we have?" she cried. "A lie. I've been sleeping in a barn on land that should have been mine, working as your housekeeper on property my own grandfather cleared." "I can make it right," he pleaded. "I'll deed the land back to you. We can make it a partnership." "Stop!" She held up a hand. "Don't you see? Anything you offer now is just guilt money. How do I ever know what's real?" "Because I love you," he said, the words torn from him. Tears streamed down her face. "I love you too, and that's what makes this impossible." She backed away toward the door. "I need time. I can't stay here. Not now." "Joe, don't do this," he begged. "This isn't about pride," she said, her hand on the doorknob. "It's about truth, and right now, I don't know what the truth is anymore." She walked out, leaving him alone in the warm kitchen with the cold, hard proof of a 40-year-old transaction that had just destroyed his future. He heard her in the barn, the sounds of her packing. An hour later, he heard her truck and horse trailer pull away, heading out into the cold November night. He went to the barn. It was empty. Her cot was stripped. Daisy's stall was swept clean. On the workbench was a note. "Thank you for everything. The spare key is under the feed bucket." The politeness was more brutal than any angry words could have been. He walked back to the mansion, the silence rushing in to fill the spaces she had occupied. The house was just a house again. Cold. Empty. A tomb. He had found a second chance at life, and his own past had risen up to strangle it. 3 days later, he found her at a boarding stable outside Sheridan. She was in the arena with Daisy, her shoulders slumped, her movements tired. The fire was gone. "Joe, we need to talk," he said from the fence. "I don't think we do," she said, not looking at him. "I've been doing my own research, talking to people who were around back then." "Then you know," he said, his voice desperate. "You know your grandmother was about to lose everything. The medical bills from your grandfather's cancer. The bank was days from foreclosing." "I know," she said, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were full of pain. "And it doesn't change anything, Silas. It's not just about the money. It's about the power. It means I can never be sure if you love me or if you just feel guilty. And you can never be sure I love you, and not this land you own. There has to be a way through this," he said. "Maybe," she said, her voice weary. "But I need time to figure out what that looks like on my own." He drove back to the ranch, the emptiness of his truck echoing the emptiness in his chest. He had offered to give the land back, to make it right. But he understood now. She wasn't looking for a handout. She was looking for a foothold. A place to stand where she wasn't in his shadow, not indebted to him for her horse, her home, her very survival. She was looking for a way to be his equal. And as he sat in his lonely kitchen that night, he realized with a chilling certainty that the only way she could do that was to fight him. Not with words, but with everything she had. He didn't know it yet, but a war was coming. And it would be fought over 640 acres of Wyoming dirt that held both their histories, and maybe, just maybe, their only chance at a future. The legal summons arrived on a cold December morning. It was from one of the most powerful law firms in Cheyenne. Joe McClary was suing him. She was suing to reclaim ownership of her family's 640 acres, claiming the 1983 sale was conducted under duress and was therefore invalid. But it was worse than that. Her lawyers had done their homework. They'd found old land valuations suggesting the ranch was worth nearly double what he'd paid. They'd found affidavits from old neighbors claiming his offer was predatory. Most damning of all, they had uncovered a pattern. They'd found 5 other instances in the 80s where S.J. Grant Enterprises had purchased distressed properties from families facing foreclosure, all at below market prices. They were painting him as a vulture who had built his empire on the misfortune of others. His own lawyer's assessment was brutal. "Silas, this is going to be a messy, expensive fight. Best case, you win, but your reputation gets dragged through the mud. Worst case, you lose the land and face millions in punitive damages." He drove to Sheridan immediately. He found her in the arena, her face set and determined. "A lawsuit, Joe," he demanded. "Why this way?" "Because it's the only way to level the playing field," she said, her voice steady. "As long as you own my family's land, as long as I'm the woman you rescued, we'll never know if what we feel is real, or just guilt and gratitude." "So you're willing to destroy me to find out?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I'm willing to risk everything to find out the truth," she countered. "And if this destroys any chance we ever had, then it wasn't real to begin with." He stared at her, this woman he loved, who was now his sworn enemy. "What do you want from me, Joe? What will it take to make this stop?" Her answer chilled him to the bone. "I want you to fight me," she said. "Fight as hard as you can. No mercy, no holding back. I want you to respect me enough to treat me as an equal opponent, not as a charity case." It was the craziest, most self-destructive test of love he had ever imagined. It was also, he realized, the only thing she would accept. If he won, she would know he hadn't come back to her out of pity. If she won, he would know she could love him even when she didn't need him. The battle lines were drawn. The small town of Powderhorn County erupted with gossip. Sides were chosen. Friendships of 40 years were strained. The lawsuit became a local legend. The old rancher versus the former rodeo queen. Silas saw the whispers, the judgmental looks. His reputation, so carefully built over a lifetime, was being dismantled piece by piece. Joe was paying a different price. Her lawyers were working on contingency, but court costs were piling up. She sold her truck and trailer. She took on extra work at the stable, mucking stalls, her hands raw, her body aching with old injuries and new exhaustion. The weeks dragged on. Lawyers exchanged hostile letters. Depositions were taken, turning their private pain into public record. The trial date loomed. Then, 3 weeks before the trial, his lawyer called with devastating news. "They found something, Silas. Something bad." "What?" "They found 5 other cases, ranches you bought from families in crisis. They're going to paint you as a predator. It's a pattern, Silas, and juries hate patterns." The bottom line was stark. His chances of winning had just plummeted. Joe's lawyers were going to crucify him. That night Silas sat in his kitchen, staring at Eleanor's letter. "Take care of the relationships that give your life meaning," she had written. He had spent his life building an empire of dirt and cattle. But what good was an empire if you were king of an empty castle? He finally understood. This wasn't about the land. It had never been about the land. It was about Joe needing to prove, to him and to herself, that she was strong enough to stand on her own. It was about her needing to be free to choose him, not just settle for him. The next morning, he drove to the stable. He found her in the arena with Daisy. Horse and rider moved as one, a fluid dance of trust and memory. He watched them for a long time, the ache in his chest, a familiar companion. "Joe," he called out softly. She brought Daisy to a halt, her face weary but defiant. "If you're here to offer a settlement, Silas, the answer is no." "I'm not," he said, walking to the fence. "I'm here to tell you that you're right." She stared at him, confused. "What?" "You're right. About everything." He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said, about fighting you, and I realized I don't want to fight you, Joe. I want to fight for you. I don't understand." "I'm dropping my defense," he said, the words feeling more right than anything he'd said in years. "I'm giving you the land, all of it." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Silas, that's not what I wanted." "Yes, it is," he said, his voice gentle. "You wanted to know what was real. Well, now you'll know. When you own your land, free and clear, when you have choices, when you can tell me to go to hell and mean it, that's when we'll find out what's real between us." Tears started to run down her face. "You could lose everything." "I already did," he said softly. "When you left, this place went back to being just land and buildings. It stopped being a home." He reached his hand through the fence, not quite touching her. "I'm giving you your inheritance, your independence, your power. And then, I'm going to court you properly. I'm going to prove that you're worth more to me than all the land in Wyoming." She looked at him, at this man willing to sacrifice his life's work just to give her the freedom to choose. The anger, the fear, the lifetime of hurt that had driven her to this fight. It all began to crumble. "Silas," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "What?" "Lightning Joe," she said, a watery smile breaking through the tears. "I think I've been an idiot." "We both have," he said, his own eyes shining. "But maybe we can be idiots together." The settlement was drafted in a stuffy law office in Cheyenne. It was a complete surrender. Silas was deeding her the 640 acres, water rights, mineral rights, plus a cash settlement to cover her legal fees and give her a running start. "This is too much," she whispered across the conference table after the lawyers had stepped out. "It's what's fair," he insisted. "It's what the land is worth today." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're doing this out of guilt." "I'm doing this because I love you," he said, his voice raw. "And I can't build a life with someone who feels like she owes me everything. This way, you're free. If you decide you want to be with me, it'll be because you choose to, not because you need to." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I already know I want to be with you." "You think you do," he said gently. "But you've never had the chance to choose freely." She looked at the papers that would make her a wealthy woman, that would restore her family's legacy. Everything she thought she wanted. And it all felt wrong. "I'll sign this," she said, her voice suddenly strong. "On one condition." "Anything." "That you let me make a counteroffer." He looked at her, completely baffled. "A counteroffer?" "I want the land," she said. "It's my heritage. But I will not take it as a gift fueled by your guilt. I will buy it from you." "Joe, you don't have that kind of money." "I will," she said, her eyes flashing with the fire he hadn't seen in months. "I'll get a mortgage, and I'll pay that mortgage by entering into a business partnership with my new neighbor, combining our operations and sharing the profits." He stared at her, dumbfounded. "You want to buy your own land back, just to go into business with me?" "I want to be your partner, Silas," she said, her voice softening. "Your equal. In business and in life. I want to build something new, together. Not as a landlord and his housekeeper, not as a benefactor and his charity case, as equals. It was the most complicated, insane, beautiful business proposal he had ever heard. He looked at this incredible woman who had turned down a fortune in favor of a fair fight, who was willing to take on debt and risk just to stand beside him as an equal. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm willing to try anything that keeps you in my life." 3 months later, on a warm May evening, Silas stood in the yard holding a small velvet box. Inside was Eleanor's wedding ring set. He'd had it cleaned and resized, just in case. In the past months, they had become true partners. They'd merged their ranches, creating the McClary Grant operation. Joe had moved into the old foreman's cottage on her land, and every day they worked side by side. Every night he courted her properly, with dinners and long talks on her porch. She came out of the barn, her face smudged with dirt, a tired smile on her lips. "Silas," she said, her voice full of a gentle warmth that still made his heart ache. He opened the box. "Eleanor wrote that she wanted me to find someone who would remind me that life is for living," he said, his voice shaking. "Joe McClary, I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm asking you to build something new with me. Will you be my partner in everything?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you, Silas Grant?" "I'm asking you to be my partner in the work we do, the life we build, and whatever time we have left." She looked at the rings, then at him. "I have one condition." "Anything," he breathed. "I want us to build a new house, right on the ridge between our two properties. Not yours, not mine, ours." "Done," he said instantly. "And I want Daisy to have the pasture right behind it, so I can see her every morning." "Joe," he said, his voice rough, "are you saying yes?" She took the engagement ring from the box and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I'm saying yes," she said, her voice choked with happy tears. "Yes to building a life together. Yes to being partners. Yes to taking care of each other, without trying to control each other." He pulled her into his arms, and the kiss was a promise. A new beginning forged in the fires of their pasts. 6 months later, they stood on the porch of their new home, a beautiful log house built right on that ridge. A new sign stood at the entrance to the drive. McClary Grant Ranch. Established 1892. Renewed 2025. A truck pulled up the drive. It was Silas's son, Thomas, and behind him, a car with his daughter, Sarah. And with them, their families, his grandchildren, kids he hadn't seen in years. Silas's face crumpled with a joy so pure it was painful to watch. He had sent them wedding invitations, but he hadn't known if they would come. "Dad," Thomas said, and the years of distance melted away as they embraced. Sarah joined in, and soon they were all laughing and crying at once. Sarah pulled away and looked at Joe, her eyes kind. "You must be Joe. Thank you. Thank you for making him happy." That evening, the new house was filled with the noise and chaos of family. It was a sound Silas thought he would never hear again. After dinner, Thomas pulled Joe aside. "We were wrong," he said quietly. "We were so angry after Mom died. We wanted him to stay frozen in his grief forever. We thought moving on was a betrayal. But seeing him like this is what Mom would have wanted." Later, as the sun set, the whole family gathered on the porch. Joe found herself telling stories about her rodeo days, the kids listening with wide-eyed wonder. Silas sat beside her on the swing, his hand covering hers, a look of perfect contentment on his face. After everyone had left, they sat in the quiet of the evening, watching the stars come out. Daisy grazed peacefully in the pasture below. "I don't think I could have gotten them back if I hadn't found you first," Silas said. I had to learn how to be happy again before I could teach them it was okay for them to be happy too. Jo leaned her head on his shoulder, thinking of the impossible journey that had brought her to this porch, to this man, to this life. From a washed-up rodeo star with nothing but a tired horse, to the co-owner of a thriving ranch, surrounded by a family she never knew she was missing. "Silas," she said softly. "Yes, I love you." "I love you too, Lightning Joe McClary Grant." They sat in the peaceful dark, two weathered souls who had fought through grief and pride and the ghosts of the past to find each other. They had learned that the strongest fences are built on equal ground, and that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't owned, but shared. This story is a reminder that it's never too late for a second chapter, and that true love isn't about finding someone to rescue you, but about finding someone who gives you the strength to rescue yourself. If you enjoyed this story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what I have coming for you next.